The sharp click of a gun holster echoed through the quiet night as Officer Derek Owens rested his hand on his weapon, his stance wide, his eyes locked onto the black woman standing before him. The flickering gas station lights cast shadows across the pavement, but Maya Carter didn't move. She remained still, her expression unreadable, while Owens smirked, enjoying the moment. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered, his tone laced with amusement. He had done this 100 times before. Assert dominance, watch them squirm. But Maya didn't flinch. Instead, she reached inside her coat, moving slow and deliberate. Owens tensed, ready to draw his gun, until she pulled out a small leather badge case and flipped it open. The golden letters glinted under the fluorescent lights. FBI Special Agent. Owens stared, then let out a mocking laugh. "That's cute," he scoffed. "You really expect me to believe this?" Maya glanced at her watch. 2 minutes left. Maya Carter lowered her wrist after glancing at her watch, her face remaining calm and unreadable. The laughter from Officer Derek Owens still echoed in the quiet night, his smirk growing as he squared his stance. To him, this was just another routine stop, another moment to throw his weight around. He had done it so many times before, pulling over someone who looked suspicious, demanding answers they didn't owe him, treating authority like his personal weapon. But tonight was different. Maya stood firm, her badge still held open in her hand, its golden shine catching the harsh, fluorescent lights above them. The Federal Bureau of Investigation. The title alone should have sent a jolt of realization through Owens, but instead, he scoffed, shaking his head. "Lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but out here?" He tapped his chest. "My badge is the only one that matters." The arrogance in his voice was almost comical, and Maya barely suppressed the urge to shake her head. He truly had no idea who he was dealing with. A few feet away, near the entrance of the gas station, a small group of bystanders had gathered. Some held up their phones, recording the interaction. Others whispered amongst themselves, their eyes darting between Maya and the officer. They could feel it. Something was off. This wasn't just another routine stop. Behind the counter inside the store, the clerk, an older man with tired eyes, watched nervously. He had seen Officer Owens in action before. The man had a reputation in this area, quick to pull his gun, slow to listen. Meanwhile, Maya remained still, her posture unwavering. She wasn't scared. She had faced real criminals before. Drug lords, violent gang leaders, terrorists, men who actually posed a threat. Owens? He was nothing more than a small-time bully in uniform, hiding behind a badge he didn't deserve. But she knew better than to escalate. She could have revealed everything in that moment. Who she was, why she was there, how she already had enough evidence to put him away. But that wasn't the plan. Not yet. Just beyond the gas station, parked near the curb, a sleek black SUV sat in the shadows. Inside, Agent Ryan Miller, her FBI partner, watched the scene unfold. His grip tightened on the steering wheel, his sharp eyes locked on Owens. Miller was ready. They had been tracking Owens for weeks, collecting reports of his abuses, false arrests, racial profiling, excessive force. The moment he pulled his gun on Maya, his fate was sealed. But Maya wanted him to dig his own grave first. Owens took a step closer, his hand still hovering near his gun. He was enjoying this. "You're not fooling anyone," he sneered. "You think flashing some fake badge is going to change anything?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "What? You print that off the internet? You think I'm stupid?" Maya remained silent. She knew that anything she said wouldn't change his mind, but time would. A muscle in Owen's jaw twitched when she didn't react. He wanted a response. He wanted her to flinch, to break. She didn't. The bystanders weren't whispering anymore. They were watching, waiting. Maya exhaled slowly, finally speaking in a low, even tone. "Officer Owens, I suggest you think very carefully about your next move." Owens grinned. "Oh, yeah?" He took another step forward. "And why's that?" Maya glanced at her watch again. 1 minute left. The sharp click of Officer Derek Owens' boot against the pavement echoed through the parking lot as he stepped closer, his hand still hovering over his holstered gun. The smirk on his face remained, radiating arrogance as he loomed over Maya Carter. He was convinced he had complete control of the situation, convinced that the woman before him was nothing more than another civilian trying to talk her way out of trouble. He had done this before. Pull them over, flex his authority, watch them squirm. It was routine. Maya, however, didn't react. She stood her ground, her posture composed, her expression unwavering. The gold lettering on her badge reflected in the dim glow of the gas station lights, yet Owens didn't even bother to look at it properly. Instead, he scoffed, shaking his head as if the idea of a black woman being an FBI agent was nothing more than a bad joke. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice thick with condescension. "Why don't you go ahead and tell me why I should be thinking about my next move?" The silence around them deepened. The bystanders, once whispering among themselves, had gone completely still. They could feel it, the shift in the air, the unspoken tension crackling between the two figures standing off. Their phones were still recording, eyes wide, breaths held. Inside the gas station, the clerk stood stiffly behind the counter, having seen this scenario play out before. He had witnessed Officer Owens do this to others, but this time something was different. Maya inhaled slowly, her calm demeanor unwavering. "Because, Officer Owens," she said smoothly, "I'm giving you a chance to walk away from this, right now." Owens let out a dry chuckle, his fingers twitching near the grip of his gun. "Lady, you're in no position to be giving me chances." His voice hardened as he took another step closer, his stance widening. "Now put your hands on the hood of the car. I'm done playing games." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. The weight of his authority, the years of unchecked power behind that badge, gave him the confidence to believe he could do whatever he wanted. The bystanders shifted uncomfortably, some of them exchanging worried glances. They had seen scenes like this before. They knew how they usually ended. Maya, however, remained unimpressed. She exhaled softly, tilting her head slightly as she glanced at her watch. 30 seconds. Owens narrowed his eyes, misinterpreting her silence as hesitation. He took another bold step forward, his fingers fully brushing against the handle of his gun. "I don't care what kind of badge you think you have," he sneered. "You don't make the rules out here." "I do." That was it. Maya didn't react, but inside she knew. He had just made the mistake that would cost him everything. She held her position, letting the seconds count down in her mind. Then, the sound of screeching tires tore through the silence. Owens barely had time to turn his head before a sleek black SUV roared into the parking lot, its tires skidding slightly before coming to a sharp halt. The doors swung open with precision, and in an instant, two figures in dark suits stepped out, their movements sharp and deliberate. The tension in the air thickened as they approached. The taller of the two, a man with piercing blue eyes and an FBI badge clipped to his belt, stepped forward, his presence commanding the space around him. His voice rang out, firm and unwavering. "Derek Owens, step away from the agent, now!" Owens froze. His fingers twitched near his weapon, but he didn't move. The smirk that had been glued to his face all night disappeared in an instant. His gaze darted between the approaching agents and Maya, his mind racing to process what was happening. Maya finally turned slightly, her expression calm as ever. "Took you long enough, Miller." Agent Ryan Miller didn't break his focus from Owens. "You looked like you had it under control." His voice was even, professional, but there was a sharp edge beneath it. His hand hovered near his own firearm, not in threat, but in preparation. Owens's mouth opened, but no words came out. The weight of reality hit him all at once. The badge he had laughed at, the woman he had mocked, it was all real. And now he wasn't standing in front of just one federal agent. He was standing in front of the entire force of the law. Miller stepped forward, his voice dropping into a direct command. "Hands where I can see them, officer." Owens' confidence shattered. The bravado drained from his expression as he took half a step back, suddenly hyper-aware of the dozens of phones still recording. His own body cam was on, still capturing every second of what had just happened. Every arrogant remark, every threat, every abuse of power. He licked his lips, trying to find the right words. "Wait, hold on," he stammered, his voice suddenly quieter. "There's been a misunderstanding." Maya arched an eyebrow, finally allowing a small smirk to cross her lips. "Oh, a misunderstanding?" She tilted her head. "That's funny, because I seem to recall you pointing a gun at a federal agent just a minute ago." Owen's face paled. He looked around desperately, searching for an escape that didn't exist. "Put your hands up, Owens." Miller's voice cut through the silence like a blade. This time, it wasn't a suggestion. The bystanders didn't move. The cameras stayed locked onto the scene. For the first time that night, Derek Owens looked like a man who had lost all control. Maya checked her watch again, then glanced up at Owens with a small, knowing nod. Right on time. Officer Derek Owens stood frozen, his eyes darting between Maya Carter and the two federal agents now approaching him. The confidence he had just moments ago had evaporated. The gun he had been so eager to draw now felt like a ticking time bomb strapped to his hip. His fingers twitched near the holster, but he knew better than to pull it now. He had lost control, and everyone, including the bystanders still recording, knew it. Agent Ryan Miller didn't break stride as he moved in, his voice sharp and unwavering. "Hands where I can see them, Owens." The authority in his tone left no room for argument. This wasn't a traffic stop. This wasn't a power trip. This was an order. Maya remained still, watching Owens with quiet amusement. She had given him a chance. She had let him choose his fate, had even warned him. But he had been too blinded by his own arrogance to listen. Now, the inevitable had arrived. Owens swallowed hard, forcing out a dry laugh. "Look, this is just a misunderstanding," he started, his voice lower, no longer dripping with condescension. "I thought she was—" "You thought she was what?" Maya cut in, her voice even but laced with steel. "Another black woman you could harass without consequences? Someone you could intimidate? Someone without power?" She took a step closer, locking eyes with him. "How's that working out for you?" Owens's jaw clenched. He glanced at the bystanders, at the phones still trained on him, capturing every second of his downfall. His own body cam was still rolling too, recording every threat he had made, every unlawful action he had taken. Miller reached for his radio, his other hand still hovering near his weapon. "Dispatch, this is Special Agent Miller. We have a situation. requesting immediate backup for an officer in violation of federal law. Owens snapped his head back toward Miller, panic flashing across his face. "Now, hold on." "No," Miller cut him off, his tone final. "You don't talk. You listen." He took another step forward, his stance solid. "As of this moment, you are under investigation for obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and unlawful brandishing of a firearm against a federal agent." The weight of those words hit Owens like a truck. His mouth opened, then shut again. His fingers twitched at his side, his muscles locking up as if his body was physically rejecting what was happening. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Maya, sensing his next move before he even made it, spoke again, her voice dangerously calm. "Don't do it, Owens." Owens' breath was shaky. His fingers curled into a fist before reluctantly rising to where everyone could see them. He wasn't about to make this worse. Miller gave a small nod, not breaking eye contact. Smart choice. He turned slightly toward Maya. "Agent Carter, would you like to do the honors?" Maya arched a brow before reaching down to Owen's belt and unhooking the very handcuffs he had planned to use on her. The irony wasn't lost on her. She took her time, letting the moment hang heavy in the air before stepping behind him. "Derek Owens, you are under federal investigation. You have the right to remain silent." The bystanders gasped as the cuffs clicked into place around Owens' wrists. The sound was louder than the surrounding city noise, louder than anything he had heard before. It was the sound of his reign of terror coming to an end. Maya continued reading him his rights as she secured the cuffs, her voice steady. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be provided for you." Owens wasn't smirking anymore. His face was stiff, his eyes hollow as the reality of the situation fully sank in. The backup officers arrived just as Maya finished, stepping out of their vehicles cautiously. They had clearly been expecting a different scenario, maybe another suspect on the ground, maybe someone else being forced into cuffs. What they found instead was one of their own, standing red-faced and restrained while two federal agents took charge. One of the arriving officers, a tall man with a weary expression, stepped forward hesitantly. "Agent Miller, what's going on here?" Miller didn't flinch. "What's going on is that your officer here thought he could threaten a federal agent." His gaze hardened. "And now he's going to answer for it." The officer exhaled, exchanging an unreadable glance with his partner before nodding. "Understood." No one moved to defend Owens. No one argued. No one tried to excuse what had just happened. Maya stepped back, dusting off her hands as Owens was led toward a police car, the very car he had driven here, thinking he was in control. She watched as he was lowered into the back seat, his once firm shoulders now slumped in defeat. Just before they closed the door, Maya crouched slightly, meeting his dazed gaze. "Next time you see a badge like mine, Owens, try taking it seriously." The door slammed shut. The bystanders, who had been holding their breath, finally erupted into murmurs, some shaking their heads, some quietly cheering. The gas station clerk, still watching from inside, let out a slow, relieved breath. For once, justice had played out in real time. Miller adjusted his jacket, glancing over at Maya. "So, dinner?" Maya rolled her eyes but smirked. "You buying?" Miller sighed dramatically. "I suppose, considering you just single-handedly made my job easier." With that, they turned toward their SUV, the flashing lights from the squad cars painting the pavement behind them. Owens was gone, but his story was just beginning. And Maya? She had work to do. Justice didn't stop with one arrest. It never did. As the squad car carrying Officer Derek Owens pulled away, the flashing red and blue lights reflected off the surrounding buildings, signaling the end of his unchecked authority. The man, who once thrived on intimidation, was now sitting in the back of a police car, wrists locked in the very cuffs he had used to humiliate others. Maya Carter watched for a moment before exhaling, the weight of the moment settling over her. This wasn't just about one cop abusing his power. This was a message, a reminder that no one, no matter their badge or rank, was above the law. Agent Ryan Miller leaned against the black SUV, crossing his arms as he watched Maya. "You know," he said, tilting his head toward the departing squad car, "this isn't the first complaint filed against him." Maya turned her gaze to him, her expression unreadable. "I figured," she said flatly. "Guys like him don't wake up one morning and decide to be this reckless. This kind of behavior builds over time because no one stops them." Miller nodded, pushing off the vehicle as he reached for his phone. "Yeah, and judging by what I just pulled up, Owens should have been stopped a long time ago." He tapped a few buttons before turning the screen toward Maya. A long list of misconduct reports, citizen complaints, and internal affairs reviews filled the screen. Excessive force, racial profiling, unlawful arrests, cases dismissed due to lack of evidence. But now, there was plenty of evidence. Maya scanned the reports, her jaw tightening slightly. "And yet, he was still on the streets," she muttered. "Still pulling people over, still waving his gun around like it made him invincible." She shook her head. How many people did he do this to before tonight? Miller didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew the answer was too many. The bystanders who had recorded everything had started to drift away, some whispering among themselves, others glancing at Maya with newfound respect. The gas station clerk, who had been watching from inside, hesitated before stepping out, his hands stuffed into his apron pockets. "Excuse me, Agent," he said, his voice cautious but firm. "That officer, Owens, he's been patrolling this area for years, and this isn't the first time he's pulled a stunt like that." Maya turned her full attention to him. "You've seen him do this before?" The clerk nodded. "More times than I can count." His gaze dropped slightly. Some people filed complaints. Some didn't bother because they figured nothing would happen. He knew how to push just enough without getting caught. He sighed heavily. Guess he pushed too far this time. Miller exchanged a look with Maya before speaking. "If you know anyone willing to come forward, tell them now's the time." He held up his phone. "This isn't just about tonight. The DOJ is going to want everything." The clerk nodded slowly. "I'll talk to some folks." He gave Maya one last look. "You did good out there, Agent." Then, with a small nod, he disappeared back inside the store. Maya exhaled, running a hand through her hair. "It's never just one," she murmured, half to herself. "There's always more." Miller nodded in agreement. "And we're going to find them." He glanced at his phone again. "We need to send this up the chain. Owens is just the tip of the iceberg. If he was protected this long, that means someone was covering for him." Maya clenched her jaw, her mind already racing. If Owens had been allowed to continue despite the complaints, it meant there was a system in place protecting him. Someone had overlooked the evidence. Someone had excused his behavior. And now it was time to find out who. She checked her watch, not for countdowns this time, but for what came next. This wasn't over. It never was. Justice had to keep moving. Maya Carter stood outside the gas station watching as the squad car carrying Derek Owens disappeared into the distance. One man down, but the fight wasn't over. The real problem wasn't just him. It was the system that had allowed him to operate unchecked for years. As much satisfaction as she felt seeing the cuffs around his wrists, she knew that true justice wasn't about one arrest. It was about making sure another officer didn't take his place. Ryan Miller leaned against the SUV, scrolling through his phone, his expression unreadable. "It's worse than I thought," he muttered. Internal Affairs has been sitting on complaints about Owens for over 3 years. He shook his head, disgusted. Reports of excessive force, racial profiling, intimidation tactics, and they still let him keep his badge. Maya sighed, crossing her arms, because they never expected anyone to hold him accountable, she said. They count on people being too afraid, too exhausted to fight back. She glanced toward the gas station where the clerk had already disappeared back inside. But people remember. They see everything, and they know when justice is being denied. Miller exhaled, nodding. "Well, it's not being denied anymore." He scrolled a little further before turning the phone toward her. DOJ is opening an investigation into not just Owens, but his entire precinct. Apparently, he wasn't the only one with complaints that were ignored. Maya's lips pressed into a thin line. Of course, he wasn't. It was never just one bad cop, just one instance of misconduct. It was always deeper, always bigger. And now, with the DOJ stepping in, they had a real chance to clean house. Miller pocketed his phone and gave her a knowing look. "You're not done, are you?" Maya let out a dry chuckle. "You know me better than that." She had no intention of stopping at Owens. If the department had covered for him, she wanted names. She wanted to know who looked at those complaints and chose to ignore them. She wanted to know who else had been silenced, threatened, or forced to walk away. Miller shook his head with a smirk. "Well, looks like we're in for a long night." Maya glanced at her watch, not to count down this time, but to plan. "We need statements from the people who've been affected by Owens and his department. The clerk said he'd talk to people. If we can get first-hand accounts, we'll have more than enough to build a solid case." Miller nodded. "Agreed. And with the DOJ stepping in, we can ensure these cases don't just disappear like before." The sound of sirens faded into the distance, and the street grew quieter. The bystanders had dispersed, but Maya knew this moment would live on. The footage would spread. People would talk. More would come forward. She took a deep breath and turned toward Miller. "We've got work to do." Miller smirked. "We always do." With that, they stepped into the SUV and pulled away, the city lights stretching out before them. Justice had been served tonight, but the fight was far from over. As the SUV pulled away from the gas station, Maya Carter leaned back in her seat, watching the city blur past. The flashing lights were gone, the immediate chaos had settled, but she knew this wasn't over. One corrupt officer was in cuffs, but the real battle had just begun. The DOJ investigation would dig deeper, exposing the system that had protected men like Owens for years. More names would surface, more stories would be told, and justice would demand more than a single arrest. Ryan Miller glanced over at her, sensing the thoughts running through her mind. "You ever think about what happens next?" he asked. "After all this?" Maya exhaled, turning to face him. "Yeah, I do." She paused, watching the distant skyline. "And that's why we can't stop here. The moment we let up, the moment we think one win is enough, it starts all over again." The SUV came to a stop at a red light, the glow reflecting against the windshield. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was understanding. The fight for justice wasn't about single victories. It was about making sure the next person didn't have to fight the same battle. Miller nodded. "Then let's keep going." Maya smirked, nodding in return. Justice didn't stop tonight. It never did. Do you think officers like Owens deserve harsher punishments? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe in justice, like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories.